Welcome to my channel Galactic War Story. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. The Vorkai Empire did not use chairs. That was the first thing Dale Soren noticed when he was escorted into the Chamber of Binding on the orbital fortress Karasvel. The floor was a vast disk of polished obsidian stone, smooth and cold, rising in concentric rings toward a raised center platform where the High Commander stood like a monument to controlled fury. Around him, Vorkai officers stood in perfect stillness, robes layered in deep violet and iron gray, their elongated skulls gleaming faintly under overhead lights that pulsed on a rhythm Dale had long since identified as matched to Vorkai heartbeat, a display of unity that no human delegation had ever been meant to understand. Dale understood it perfectly. He kept that to himself. His badge read DAELSOREN, Tertiary Mechanical Liaison, Human Trade Coalition, which was accurate as far as it went. He did maintain ship systems. He did file repair logs. He had, for 11 months aboard this station, crouched inside engine cores that smelled like burning copper and alien chemistry, replacing conduit relays and recalibrating pressure seals, while Vorkai engineers watched him with expressions somewhere between contempt and scientific curiosity. What the badge did not say was that he spoke Vorkai. Not pidgin, not the simplified trade dialect, not the flat-toned approximation that human translators used with blunt, serviceable efficiency. Dale spoke High Vorkai, the layered tonal language of command, ceremony, and private thought, the language that Vorkai scholars spent decades mastering, the language that carried meaning in its silences as much as its sounds. He had learned it the way he learned most things, accidentally, then obsessively. It had started with the engines. Vorkai propulsion systems ran on resonance principles, a harmonic oscillation between paired cores that had to be tuned by ear as much as instrument. The engineers who maintained them spoke to the machines constantly, low rhythmic phrases that helped them track oscillation patterns. Dale, spending long shifts in the engine bays, had heard those phrases thousands of times. He had begun to mimic them purely to stay sane. Then he had noticed they meant something. Then he had found the technical archives on the station's secondary data network unlocked, because no one imagined a human mechanic could read them, and the obsession had taken root. That was 3 years ago. Now he stood in the Chamber of Binding, and the Human Coalition's lead negotiator, Ambassador Yenta Harlow, was delivering what Dale privately considered the most diplomatically suicidal speech he had ever heard. She was courteous. She was precise. Her human translator was competent. None of that mattered, because the translator was rendering her opening proposal in Trade Vorkai, and in Trade Vorkai, the phrase she had chosen for mutual benefit arrangement carried an undertone that literally translated as exchange between parties of unequal standing. In High Vorkai, the phrase she needed implied parity, balance, respect between equals. High Commander Vethkaran's jaw moved almost imperceptibly. In Vorkai physiology, that was the equivalent of a human turning to leave. Dale exhaled slowly through his nose. Around him, the other human staff stood in careful formal stillness, junior diplomats, aid runners, security personnel in dress uniforms that looked slightly too warm for the room's temperature. None of them noticed the jaw movement. None of them would have known what it meant if they had. He watched the High Commander's senior aide lean fractionally toward a colleague and murmur, voice pitched below human hearing range. Except that Dale's hearing had been partially reconstructed after a pressure seal incident 2 years ago, and the replacement components happened to extend his audible spectrum into frequencies the Vorkai assumed were private. "The ambassador does not know she is insulting us," the aide murmured. The colleague replied, "No, but her mechanics might." A pause, then the colleague's gaze moved, slow and deliberate, across the room, and landed on Dale. He did not look away. He did not change his expression. He gave the Vorkai officer the same mild, slightly vacant look he had perfected over 11 months of strategic invisibility. The officer held his gaze for 3 seconds, then looked away. Dale let out a very slow breath. Ambassador Harlow continued her speech. The translator continued flattening it. Dale continued counting the soft tonal clicks the High Commander's fingers made against the ceremonial armrest, a habit Vorkai leaders developed, similar to drumming. Each click pattern had a meaning. He was currently generating the pattern for this meeting has already failed. Dale had a choice. He could stay quiet. He was a mechanic. This was not his room, not his rank, not his responsibility. Staying quiet was safe. Staying quiet was professionally sensible. Staying quiet meant going back to his engine bay tomorrow and pretending today had simply been a long, boring afternoon. The High Commander's fingers clicked twice more. "Prepare departure honors," the aide murmured. "We will end this with courtesy." Which in Vorkai diplomatic language meant, the negotiations are over, the alliance will not form, and whatever fragile peace existed between the coalition and the Empire would begin, quietly and irreversibly, to unravel. Dale raised his hand. It was a small gesture, barely visible, but in a room of perfect stillness, it was enough. High Commander Vethkaran's gaze moved to him like a targeting system, acquiring lock. "Speak," the High Commander said in High Vorkai. "A test. No human in this room should have responded to that word." Dale responded. "With respect, High Commander," he said, in High Vorkai, his tones carrying the precise harmonic weight of formal address between equals, "there is a translation error in the third clause of the opening proposal. The ambassador intends to offer an arrangement between parties of identical standing. The phrase used implies hierarchy. I believe the correct rendering would honor both delegations more accurately." The silence that followed was a different kind of silence from the one before it. It was the silence of a room that has collectively forgotten how to breathe. The High Commander's fingers went completely still. No one moved. Dale had a passing thought that if this went badly, he would be the first human ever to cause a diplomatic collapse by being helpful. High Commander Vethkaran descended from the central platform. This was, Dale knew, not standard behavior. The High Commander did not descend. The High Commander received. The fact that he was moving at all meant something had shifted in the room's invisible architecture, some weight had redistributed itself. And the entire structure of the meeting had to find a new balance. Behind Dale, Ambassador Harlow said quietly, to no one in particular, "What just happened?" Her translator did not answer. He was staring at Dale with an expression that mixed professional offense with something approaching awe. The High Commander stopped 3 meters away. Up close, Vorkai features were sharper than they appeared from across a room. Vethkaran was old, by Vorkai reckoning. The ceremonial markings along his jaw had faded to pale silver, indicating decades of rank. His eyes were the color of deep space at the edges and burnt amber at the centers, and they were currently examining Dale with the careful, measuring attention of someone who has found an unexpected variable in a solved equation. "How long?" the High Commander said in High Vorkai, voice kept private just between them. "Have you spoken our language?" 3 years, High Commander. To this level, for approximately 14 months, I am still learning the ceremonial registers." Vethkaran was quiet for a moment. "You have been on this station for 11 months. "Yes, High Commander, I studied before I arrived. I continued studying here." "Why did you not declare this ability?" Dale considered the question carefully. It deserved an honest answer. Because a human who speaks High Vorkai without authority to do so would have been perceived as a spy or as someone seeking advantage or as someone who had violated the cultural privacy your people expect from outsiders. I did not have the right to speak it. I only had the ability. Another silence, longer this time. "And now?" "Now," Dale said, "the cost of silence is higher than the cost of speaking." The High Commander held his gaze for what felt like a very long time. Then he turned and addressed his aide in a tone that carried through the chamber. "Delay departure honors. We will continue." The ripple that moved through the Vorkai delegation was subtle but unmistakable. A collective recalibration, postures shifting, the low harmonic hum that served as their version of murmuring. The human side of the room was less subtle. Ambassador Harlow moved forward and said, in English, close to Dale's shoulder, "You are going to explain this to me in extraordinary detail." "Yes, Ambassador," Dale said, "after the session." The session resumed. With Dale seated between the two delegations, a position that had no precedent in any diplomatic protocol, he was aware of the negotiations changed character completely. He did not replace the official translator. He supplemented. He caught the places where trade Vorkai flattened nuance the High Commander's side found critical. He offered phrasing to the human delegation that preserved intent without the accidental condescension that trade registers carried when applied to high contexts. More than that, he translated the pauses. Vorkai communication carried as much meaning in silence as in sound. When the High Commander paused before answering, it was not hesitation. It was weight, acknowledgement that the question deserved gravity. Human negotiators had been misreading those pauses as reluctance for decades. Dale explained this to Harlow in a low voice between exchanges, and he watched the ambassador's entire posture change as 11 months of accumulated misunderstanding quietly rearranged itself. By midday, real terms were being discussed. By late afternoon, a preliminary framework had been laid. And then the Vorkai traditionalists made their move. Senior Legate Dervaz had been silent through most of the session. He was older than Vethkaran, from an older house, with the dense formal markings of someone who had spent a lifetime studying precisely why things should not change. When he finally spoke, it was in the fastest, most compressed high Vorkai Dale had ever heard used in a formal context, a deliberate tactic, layering clauses on top of each other so quickly that even a fluent speaker would need a moment to unpack them. He was, Dale realized immediately, trying to lose the translator on purpose. Dervaz's argument was elegant and poisonous. He was proposing that any agreement reached with Dale translating was void, not because the translation was inaccurate, but because the translator had not been declared. Under traditional Vorkai compact law, an undeclared party present during negotiation could be considered a surveillance agent, and any terms reached could be retroactively challenged. He was not accusing anyone directly. He was simply observing that the legal structure existed. And he delivered this in a cascade of compressed clauses, specifically designed to leave the human side nodding politely at words they could not follow. Dale kept his expression neutral. He let Dervaz finish. Then he stood, and in the same compressed high Vorkai the legate had used, matching speed, matching register, matching the precise formal weight that old house argument required, he responded. He acknowledged the legal tradition Dervaz cited. He agreed it was valid. He then cited a counter-tradition, older by 4 centuries, that specified an undeclared translator who corrected an error in good faith, rather than using the error for advantage, was classified not as a surveillance agent, but as a witness of conscience, a protected status under the same compact law Dervaz had invoked. He had read about that tradition in an engine bay archive at 2 in the morning, 11 months ago, while repairing a coolant relay, because he read everything. The chamber went very quiet again. Dervaz stared at him. Dale said mildly, "I am happy to discuss the 6th Accord of Compact Formation if the legate wishes. I have thoughts on paragraphs 3 through 7. Someone among the younger Vorkai officers made a sound that was not quite laughter, but was adjacent to it. Dervaz sat down. That evening, Dale was summoned to the High Commander's private chamber, alone, without protocol, without announcement. It was a room furnished in severe simplicity, 1 long table, 2 seats, a viewport showing the slow drift of stars. Vethkaran was already seated. "Sit," he said, "not a command, an invitation." Dale sat. "You embarrassed Dervaz," the High Commander said. "I corrected an error," Dale replied, "similar to this morning." A pause. "You chose the role of witness of conscience deliberately." "It was accurate." "It was also," Vethkaran said quietly, "the only framing that protected you legally. You knew that when you chose it." Dale said nothing. You are, the High Commander said, either the most careful man I have encountered in 40 years of command, or the most fortunate. In my experience, Dale said, the two are not always distinguishable. The High Commander studied him for a long moment. Then, for the first time, he smiled. It was a small expression. Vorakai faces did not invest much architecture in smiling, but it was unmistakable. Tomorrow, Vethkaran said, Dervars will escalate. His house will file a formal objection to your presence. It will be loud, and it will be precisely constructed, and it will go to the Review Council. You should prepare for that. Dale nodded slowly. High Commander, why are you telling me this? Vethkaran was quiet for a moment, looking at the stars. Because, he said, you told us this morning that the cost of silence was higher than the cost of speaking. I find I agree with that, and I have been silent on several matters for too long. He rose, ending the meeting with the precise formality of his rank. But at the door, he paused. Your pronunciation of the Sixth Accord citation, he said, without turning, was nearly perfect. You mispronounced one honorific. I know, Dale said. I did it on purpose. A pause. Why? Because if my High Vorakai is perfect, Dale said, it frightens people. A small imperfection reminds them I am still human. Frightened people make bad decisions. The High Commander was quiet for a long moment. Rest, he finally said. Tomorrow will be difficult. He left. Dale sat alone in the room, looking at the stars, listening to the deep subsonic hum of the fortress engines, a sound he had spent 11 months learning to read like a language. Tomorrow would be difficult. He had been preparing for difficult his entire life. The Review Council convened at the turn of the station's artificial dawn, and it was, as Vethkaran had promised, precisely constructed. Legate Dervars had spent the night building his case with the systematic thoroughness of a Vorakai elder who had outlasted multiple political generations by being extremely good at procedural dismemberment. His objection was 47 clauses long. Dale had counted. It challenged the validity of every term discussed during the previous session, the legitimacy of Dale's presence as an unlicensed translator, the standing of the human delegation to proceed without formal linguistic certification, and in a final flourish that Dale privately appreciated for its audacity, questioned whether a human physiological reconstruction of any kind could produce authentic High Vorakai, or merely a technically adequate mimicry that fell outside legal language definitions. In other words, he was arguing that Dale did not truly speak Vorakai. He was arguing that it did not count. Ambassador Harlow, who had spent the night being briefed by Dale in careful detail, sat very still and looked at the 47 clauses with the expression of someone who has been handed a bomb and told it is a gift basket. Can you beat it? She asked quietly. Some of it, Dale said. The first 31 clauses are procedural theater. They're designed to exhaust the counter-argument before the real point arrives. And the real point. Clause 43, the linguistic authenticity challenge, he paused. That one is genuinely difficult because it is not entirely wrong. Harlow looked at him. My voice, Dale said carefully, is not Vorakai. My reconstruction gives me the resonance range, but I learned this language as an outsider, from archives and engine bays and 3 years of listening. There will always be things I miss, things I feel around rather than feel directly. Dervars is not wrong that something is different about the way I speak it. Then we are finished, the ambassador said. No, Dale said, we are at the most important part. He rose when the Review Council called his name. He stood before 9 Vorakai elders, the legate, the High Commander, and a chamber that had filled to capacity with officers, advisors, and junior delegates who had apparently decided this was worth watching. He did not begin with an argument. He began with a story. In High Vorakai formal register, even cadence, the kind of packing that Vorakai elders used when delivering histories, he spoke about a Vorakai engineer named Serathvel, who had lived 400 years ago. Serathvel was documented in the same archives Dale had spent years reading. She had been born with a rare structural difference in her resonance chambers that prevented her from producing the standard harmonic range of high Voakai. She had compensated through years of practice and partial reconstruction, the earliest recorded use of biological modification for linguistic purposes in Voakai history, and had eventually been recognized as one of the most precise legal voices of her generation. The chamber was very quiet. Dale said the review council of her time also debated whether her language counted. He let that sit. Then he said they ruled that language is not anatomy, language is precision, intent, the capacity to carry meaning without distortion between minds that are trying, genuinely, to understand each other. Serathvel's voice was different, her meaning was not. He turned and looked directly at Dervaz. I am not Voakai, Dale said. I have never claimed to be. I learned your language because I believed the people using it deserved to be understood accurately, not flattened, not simplified, not passed through a filter of convenient approximation. I made one deliberate error yesterday in a citation. Every other word I have spoken in this chamber has been as precise as I am capable of making it. If the legate can identify an error of meaning, not an error of accent, not a difference of origin, but an actual error of meaning, I will withdraw. Silence. Dervaz opened his mouth. Closed it. One of the review council elders, a woman so old her markings had gone almost entirely white, leaned forward. Mechanic, she said, using the title not as diminishment, but as something oddly precise, you cited Serathvel's case. Do you know how the council ruled? Yes, Elder, 7-2 in favor of recognition. And the two dissenters. One argued that biological modification set a precedent that would be difficult to contain. One argued that the ruling was philosophically correct, but strategically premature. The elder was quiet for a moment. We heard similar arguments last night, she said. I know, Dale said. I read the summary notes your staff posted to the public review archive at 3 this morning. A ripple moved through the chamber. Somewhere behind him, Dale heard Ambassador Harlow make a sound that might have been suppressed laughter. The council deliberated for 2 hours. Dale spent them in a side corridor, sitting on the floor with his back against the wall because there were no chairs and he had stopped pretending he was not tired. A young Voakai officer appeared after the first hour and sat down nearby, not close, but present. After a few minutes, without preamble, the officer said in trade Voakai, "Why did you learn, truly? It is not an easy language." Dale considered the question honestly. Because the engines told me to, he said. I was in the cores for 16-hour shifts, and your engineers were singing to the machines to keep the harmonics aligned, and it seemed rude not to understand what they were saying. He paused. And because I have spent my entire life in rooms where the people who mattered were talking about things that mattered, and I was invisible, I got tired of being invisible. The officer was quiet for a moment. You were not invisible yesterday, the officer said. No, Dale agreed. That is the trade-off. The council returned a ruling of 7-2. Dale was recognized as a witness of conscience, his translations upheld, and his legal standing confirmed for the duration of the negotiations. Additionally, and this was the part that made him sit very still for a moment when he heard it, the council issued a supplementary notation that his linguistic achievement, while anomalous, fell within the same historical precedent as Serathvel's case, and was therefore recognized as authentic under compact law. Dervaz was present for the reading of the ruling. His expression did not change. His hands, at his sides, clicked twice in a pattern Dale recognized as grudging acknowledgement. He took it. The negotiations resumed the following morning and completed in 3 days. The Coalition Empire Accord was signed in High Voakai and 3 human languages simultaneously, by Ambassador Harlow and High Commander Vethkaran, with Dale seated between them and the treaty's full ceremonial preamble read aloud by the same ancient elder who had asked about the Serathvel ruling. When it was done, the elder turned to Dale and said, in High Vorkai very quietly. You pronounced the third resonant clause correctly. Most of our own young officers miss it. I practiced that one specifically, Dale admitted. The elder made a sound that was distinctly, unmistakably, a laugh. Afterward, in the now emptied chamber of binding, Vethkaran found Dale standing at the viewport, watching a human transport ship begin its dock approach, running lights blinking in patient rhythm against the black. You will not return to engine maintenance, the High Commander said. It was not a question. Probably not, Dale said. The ambassador has opinions about my next posting. And you? Dale thought about the engine bays, the long shifts, the quiet solitude of being invisible in a room full of people speaking a language they did not know he understood. He thought about how much of his life had been spent learning things no one expected him to know, preparing for moments no one expected him to be part of. I think, he said, that I have been a mechanic long enough. I fixed things that were broken. I kept systems running that would have failed. I did it quietly, and I did it well, and for a long time that was enough. He looked at the viewport. But a broken piece, he said, is a different kind of system, and someone has to know how to speak to all of its parts. Vethkaran was silent for a moment. The word in High Vorkai for what you are, the High Commander said, is not translator, it is not diplomat, it is Varath Sorrel. He paused. There is no accurate trade translation. It means approximately the one who carries the voice between storms. Dale turned that over slowly. That sounds exhausting, he said. All necessary work is, Vethkaran replied. The station hummed around them, engines steady and patient, keeping the fortress stable in the dark between worlds. Outside the viewport, the human transport completed its dock, and running lights blinked off one by one as the ship settled into berth. Dale thought about the mechanic he had been. He thought about the rooms he had sat in, invisible, listening, learning the shape of a language no one thought he could hold. He thought about the moment he had raised his hand and the silence that had followed, the enormous, rearranging silence of a room, discovering that the assumptions it had built everything on were wrong. He thought about Serasvel, 400 years dead, who had fought for the right to be heard in a voice that was hers even if it was different. He thought about a young officer sitting in a corridor asking why. He thought about the way a treaty looked when it was read aloud in a language both sides had to actually mean. Varath Sorrel, he said quietly, testing the sound. The harmonics landed correctly. The resonance settled into place like a key finding a lock. Yes, Vethkaran said. Dale nodded once. Then he turned from the viewport, squared his shoulders, and walked toward whatever came next. Behind him, the engines kept their rhythm, steady, sure, carrying the weight of something large and vital, the way engines always did when they were finally running right. End.